It's the only crop that I grew as a farmer, but it's so enjoyable to grow natural dye plants. It's creates a beautiful landscape, beautiful smells. It brings in all of the insects, and there were so many days that I would just sit on the farm and watch the flowers blow in the wind and smell the smells.
In this episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist Tyler Jenkins takes listeners on a journey through the natural dye supply chain with 3 industry experts. Max Holden is a grower based in Washington State with a passion for cultivating dye plants. Bradley Todd is a fellow NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist who resides in North Carolina and is a processor skilled in dye extraction. And Courtney Lockemer is an organizer and market builder based in North Carolina who's dedicated to advancing natural dyes in modern markets. Together, they discuss a pilot project that explored opportunities for farmers to produce natural dye plants and how these efforts can scale to meet growing market demand. Let's listen.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Tyler Jenkins with the National Center for Appropriate Technology. We've been creating small-scale and environmentally sound solutions for communities involving people since the 70s. Today, we want to talk about supply chains, and specifically supply chains around color, how color gets into our world, particularly fabrics, and have a bit of a discussion about what opportunities there are for sustainability in this space. So today I've got 3 experts with me. Max Holden from Washington. Max is a flower farmer who spent years growing color on his farm. Bradley Todd, a longtime farmer, another staff member for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, technical expert, has run and operated many businesses on the agricultural supply chain. And Courtney Lockemer, a branding and sustainability expert from North Carolina who works with a variety of brands on sustainability solutions. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Hello.
Hey, thanks for having us, Tyler.
Thanks. So, Courtney, let's get started with you today. Tell us about color in our world, where it comes from. Why should we be concerned with this?
So the color that we use on our textiles, so our clothing, our bed sheets, our towels, today primarily, in almost all cases, comes from synthetic dyes. And to understand dyes, so a dye is a chemical compound that has the ability to attach to the fibers in a textile in a permanent way. So there are a lot of things that can get on your fabric and stain it. So, you spill coffee, tomato sauce, you have a little bit of that color there, but it's not going to make your shirt tomato sauce colored forever. And historically, dyes came from natural sources, so primarily from plants, but also from insects and mollusks. And in the 19th century, that changed when synthetic dyes were invented. And by, within a few decades, almost all of the dyeing that was done in the textile industries was being done with synthetic dyes. And synthetic dyes are today almost exclusively made from petroleum. So they're petroleum based in some sort of way. And often the processes that are used to dye textiles are not healthy or toxic. At the very least, a lot of discharge from the textile dyeing processes gets into rivers and other waterways and causes pretty terrible pollution in different parts of the world. That used to happen even here in North Carolina. You can talk to folks who are alive now who remember the rivers where they grew up changing color depending on what color they were dyeing in the textile mill that day. So the reason that natural dyes are interesting are that, synthetic dyes have a short history and of use in human civilization. There are thousands of years of history of cultures all around the world developing colors for their textiles from the natural sources around them. And there were even huge industries around this after the Industrial Revolution when fabrics were being produced in large quantities. And really, there's only been, maybe not even 200 years of synthetic dyes. So natural dyes, unlike synthetic dyes, come from the earth. So I'm particularly interested in plant dyes because they have a potential to be something humans can use to coexist in a healthy way with the world. We can use food waste to dye with. We can use plants that we're growing for other purposes. We can farm in regenerative, climate beneficial ways to get the color for our clothing rather than extracting fossil fuels from the earth. Is that a good answer? How's that?
That's great. Thank you, Courtney. Well, I think you had a great transition as well. When we're talking about natural color, you really can be in three parts of that industry. You can be growing it, you can be extracting it and making it essentially, or you can be using it to create a market to put as a value add to some sort of product. So maybe let's start at the beginning there. Max, could you talk to us a little bit about the agronomics of growing dye plants? Why did you pick the plants you did? Give us a little bit of a background.
Yeah, that's sort of a good transition into it. I'm out here in Western Washington. I live in Seattle, and 2021 and 2022, I had a natural dye farm, small scale. I was on an eighth to a quarter of an acre, and I got into it so after working with you and Brad and your other colleague, Mike Lewis, when I was a senior in design school, focusing on natural dyes and natural fibers, hemp specifically. And through that, I was prototyping solutions for small scale mechanized processing of hemp fiber. And I got into that sort of through permaculture and learning about agriculture and sustainability from that lens. And in working with you, I learned a lot about market making and creating markets for products, especially sustainable products that will kind of help create a sustainable business case for them. And so when I moved to Seattle from Cincinnati, where I was before, I got into this practicum of sustainable agriculture at Viva Farms, which is an organization here, just to dig into agriculture in Western Washington. Did that program for a year and then applied for their incubator for small scale sustainable agriculture. And I originally wanted to grow hemp fiber and continue some of the work that we were doing and continue trying to make markets for that on the small scale. But as I started putting together a business case for that, it was hard to see where the market was going to be and how it could be a sustainable solution. So I had also had an interest in color and fashion and natural dyes. And I knew there was more of a market, especially on the small hobby scale, for natural dyes. And there were workshops that I could do to kind of sustain the business and create products. So that's where I focused my attention and started growing different natural dye plants. I focused on traditional natural dye plants, and I kind of had to do some research into that because I wasn't an expert coming into it. So talking to experts, they kind of helped me focus on indigo, for indigo dyeing, marigolds, hollyhock, cosmos, some of the common good natural dye plants. And I didn't really know how they would grow in Western Washington in this climate, but I just kind of got started with that. And most of the ones that I was growing grew really well, especially in the good soil I had in the Sammamish River Valley out in Woodinville, Washington. And then I just kind of built a farm around natural dyes, and there were lots of knitters and weavers in the area that were interested in my dyes, the flowers, and the workshops that we had. Yeah, used it kind of as a lab on a small scale for learning how these plants grow in the region and how I can add quality to the soil through using organic agriculture techniques and regenerative agriculture techniques. Yeah, just kind of learned as I went, and worked with people who were interested in the product.
Max, what were your biggest challenges in growing flowers, and how did you overcome them?
Our season here was a big challenge for growing some of the flowers. Our springs tend to be cold and wet. And luckily, I had access to some nice greenhouses, our student farm at Viva, and that kind of helped me extend the season forward a little bit. But a lot of flowers, they like the heat, and I had some troubles getting some things going, especially kind of like learning at the beginning of my process as a farmer. But yeah, I just kind of learned to start way more than I was going to need, and just kind of plant out what I had. And our summers are usually, they start slow, but they get really beautiful, and we have lots of sunshine, and if we're lucky, they can go pretty late. And so usually by mid-season, end of season, we were just overwhelmed with blooms, and so lucky with how our soil holds water, especially in that valley. I had to kind of learn when to start plants, and unfortunately I only had 2 seasons when I was on the farm, but by the second season I was really honing it in on how much I need to be planting and when I need to be planting to have a successful season.
Thanks, Max. Brad, want to get to you in just a second, but you mentioned something, Max, that I think I've heard Courtney talk about as well before. You had a journey of sort of looking at fiber versus natural dyes, and looking at sort of maybe a new emergent market for sustainable ag products. Courtney, talk to me about that on the marketing side as well. Are there differences in trying new products in fibers and dyes?
You mean a difference between fibers versus dyes?
I suppose I really want to dig into the difference in, let's say I grow a sustainable fiber and I grow a sustainable dye as a farmer. You know, what are my when I go to market, what's the next step for each of those, and how easy is it to get to market from either of those sides? And are there differences in those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that for the most part, fiber has got to be one of the most difficult to process, most complicated to process agricultural products that you could produce. People don't appreciate how hard it is to make fabric that feels good, is soft, fits around your body. And whether you're starting with plants or you're starting with animal fiber like wool, you're taking something out of the field that then probably has 7 or 8 or more steps to becoming something you can make cloth out of. And that requires quite a bit of labor. It either requires labor or pretty hefty machinery. So it's hard sometimes for people to appreciate that. And I think that's why so many of us have forgotten that our clothes come from agriculture, because it actually takes a really long time to get from the farm to the store where you're buying that thing. And because humans are so good at transforming these like rough plants and this sort of like, fluffy, dirty wool into something that's great to wear, it's easy to forget that that's what it is. Dyes, on the other hand, for the most part, in my opinion, are a lot simpler. Most dyes, with the exception of indigo, sort of work like, so you take the thing, you cook it in water to extract the dye, and then you have your dye. That doesn't mean it's necessarily an easy process, but way quicker to get to market and usability than it is with a fiber. Indigo is very different because it's a completely different kind of dye. And so indigo, and maybe Max can talk a little bit more about this, has to go through a fairly complicated process to become something you can use for indigo dyeing.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to use indigo, but yeah, it's completely different from some of the other dyes that you extract through heated water extraction. The molecule that dyes in indigo is very heat sensitive and also sensitive to oxygen. So there's a couple ways that we would dye with indigo, and especially doing workshops, one of the quicker, easier ways is to do fresh indigo, which you can you can kind of utilize how the indigo molecule is dissolved in the plant in its fresh state to more directly transfer to fabric. And that gives you like a beautiful lighter blue kind of teal dye. So that was pretty common for us to do in workshops, but that's not really able to be used on a commercial level because it has to be directly transferred from the fresh plant. The more common way is to extract the pigment from the plant in a few different ways. You can compost it and then have it in a ready state to dye with, or you can extract it from a more chemical means where you extract it from the plant and then precipitate it out in a solution, and then you can dry that and have it in a powder form.
That's wonderful. Brad, let's go over to you for a second. Talking about molecule extraction, I know you are a person as well who spent a career looking at scaling some of these solutions into larger production potential. So maybe talk to us about the process of processing natural dyes.
Thanks, Tyler. So my experience with natural dyes comes along the lines with other plant molecules, as you mentioned. My history's used a variety of different techniques, whether it be chemical, natural processes, various chromatography operations to purify different compounds. And so I've always had a passion for value added from agriculture. What I've seen growing up in agriculture is it's very difficult for small farmers to be able to get out there and, make a reasonable living, off the land doing these things. And so I've always tried to find value added processes, whether it's medicinal plants, whether it's commodity crops, or in this case, something that's a little bit different than other things I worked on when we initially got involved in the natural dyes. And so we looked initially when we started delving into this and seeing kind of what we could make, working along with Courtney and Max. Our first, we used a variety of different techniques to help extract stuff and kind of did this whole workup. So we kind of see what worked best, kind of the cost effectiveness of each way to do it, and kind of the end result. And so very interesting process, much like Courtney and Max have alluded to. My experiences was each plant has a little bit different way that you can extract the dye. And once you get it extracted, there comes much more in-depth usage of it, whether you're doing mordants, different things like that. So we looked at non-polar extraction, really trying to go in there and grab the compounds that were, that really didn't like water, more oil-soluble compounds. And then we went the opposite end, looking at different type of alcohol extractions, things like that really focused on really polar compounds. And really, at the end, what we found in most of the cases with the dyes we were working with, Max and Courtney have both alluded to a tea-type process, really seemed to be the one to where the colors would come out. That's kind of what our initial experience was. We did a lot of lab scale stuff, and then we grew the experiments up to large scale. So some of the methods we used to do these were liquid CO2 extraction. We use a methanol extraction, ethanol extraction, acetone was one that we had luck with in certain plants. And obviously the cold water, the warm, hot water extraction methods. Very neat. For us, our goal was to take these agriculture products, do some value-added processing to it. So what we walked away with was a concentrated bottle, or whether it's powder, whether it's liquid, of natural dyes that we then could take to somebody like Max or Courtney to then utilize with their skill set on certain fabrics. So we looked at kind of how much, what the production model was, how much, say, for instance, marigolds it takes to make 1 kilo of liquid dye. So we looked at the economics of that. And then what your previous question to Courtney on what's the best solution, is it producing fiber or producing dye? Our goal was what the economics were. Can this be a viable secondary crop to a farm to grow dye, have it extracted, and then make the price point work so folks who are starting small scale commercial enterprises with natural dyes can utilize, we can find a home for this stuff. And so that was kind of our intentions, and that's kind of what we worked through. So I hope that answered your question, Tyler. I didn't ramble too much.
No, that was great. One question I've been thinking is a follow-up, Brad. It's not like this group here has been the first group of people who thought about putting flower color into fabrics at a scale. So I want to ask, have advancements in technology improved the viability, the economic viability or sustainability of dye extraction? Are there some technologies and methods that would align with NCAT's focus on appropriate technology in your research?
A very good question, Tyler. And first, let me say, all I know is from my experience. So by no means am I a world-class expert on dye extraction. However, I took a very strong interest in looking at the history of natural dyes and through the context and lens of economics. To be quite honest with you, the way that I initially went by extracting these dyes was not the most cost-effective way to do it, basically. And throughout reading, looking at the historical use and production, what I found was very much appropriate technology application of this. And Max or Courtney, please correct me if I'm misspeaking, but what I found is a large majority of the natural dyes in the world, we'll say, are produced very, very rudimentary, I guess you would say, very simple. A lot of open pit, fires, water. They'll take them, they'll dry them out in the sun. And so it's a very labor intensive way to go about it. And it's a huge agriculture industry in a lot of other countries to where I've seen lots of information from India, Pakistan, some of the Middle East regions, things like that, of where they had large processing facilities that really was just pits with, water to where they just soak them, they dry them, they scrape them out and keep moving it till they're drying out to a powder. And so I can see lots of ways to where you can produce dyes very low cost, domestically, wherever else, whether it's a small farm or not. My question became, once I started looking at these, what was if we were to take those type of techniques in other countries and try to apply them in the U.S. to really produce at volume natural dyes, to start an industry, how did that work? How would that work economically? And so that's, I don't know that I have a complete answer for that yet, but I would definitely say there's many small scale ways to produce dyes, on site, whether it's a farm, very simple, crude methods. It's just, I feel like lots of those methods kind of render themselves to like cottage scale industries, very small scale industries, instead of large production size things that we're used to in, the economics and, North America, the way it works.
The ATTRA website has been connecting sustainable agriculture students and farmers around the country for decades. Our free internship hub makes it easy to find interns or farmers looking to hire interns. If you're looking for some practical experience on a working farm to bolster your studies, or you want to pass on the wisdom of your experience in exchange for some willing elbow grease, stop by at attra.ncat.org.
Yeah, to me, it kind of brings up a philosophical question about appropriate technology and scale. Like, people they have their techniques for their own native dyes, and there's a lot of appropriate technology in place that has been in place for many years, and there is a certain scale that it operates at. And so now it's interesting talking about bringing it to modern U.S. Supply chain, and it brings up a lot of questions. What's the appropriate scale, and what changes with the technology when you're trying to work on different levels of scale and commercialization?
That's a really good point, Max. And I think that in considering that dye extraction, rudimentary as it may be, seems to provide a lot of jobs, a lot of labor for the international working world. Courtney, how important is it that we reshore dyes? If so, are there market opportunities to begin the process of making that happen?
I think it's important to reshore dyes, for environmental and ethical reasons primarily, which is that we need to be able to, and by we, I mean anyone anywhere in the world, needs to be able to meet their needs with the resources that are available to them where they are. to the extent that that's possible. And when it comes to dyes, that's absolutely possible. At least in the United States, there might be, in Alaska, it might be a little tricky when you get into the Arctic, although there are traditional dyes in those areas, of course. We don't need to ship across the world in order to have them. And in fact, there are dyes from plants that are native to North America that are some of the best dye colors in the world. Black walnut and Osage orange are two of them. And in fact, one of the most popular dyes you can buy home scale from retail natural dye suppliers is called fustic. And it's a South American tree, and it's essentially the same thing as Osage orange. And rather than using the trees that we have growing here that can be part of a whole ecosystem, shipping things from South America, and it just makes no sense. The fossil fuel used just to ship things. But then there are all the ethical considerations of how are workers being treated, and what are the conditions that are in which, wealthy countries like the United States are getting materials from another country. And, it all breaks down to things like labor cost. It's like we're just outsourcing poor labor conditions to another place because we decided they weren't good enough for people in our country. I also think that there's something really important about being connected to the land that you live on and the people that you live around. For agriculture generally, it's because we love that feeling of connection, and we can find varieties that you can't find anywhere else, and heirlooms, and you sort of actually feel like you're not just a generic, creature that's been like stamped out of a mold in a factory. And that really changes the way you experience life in a way that large scale capitalism doesn't want you to remember, right? And so I think just like this returning to your culture or developing a new culture, material culture based on what's unique to your place is so important.
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll say on the heels of that answer, Courtney, what if I'm a market maker, if I have a brand, if I have a line, if I'm looking to get natural dyes into my products, is the focus on sustainability? Is it on local? Where have there been successes in integrating natural dye products into markets?
Absolutely. Those two things, sustainability, a local connection, have definitely, in my experience, resonated with people a lot. And sometimes even, for some people, it's the sustainability more. For some people, it's not. It's the local connection is it. Things that are important to people, like having something that is biodegradable, something that's non-toxic, something that's plastic-free. So there are a lot of people who, are realizing that the stuff we're putting on our bodies is not necessarily good for us. There was a book that just came out called To Die For, looks at this, that is all about this particular issue, about how fabrics and the finishes that go on fabrics and the treatments can actually be really toxic for our skin and be really unhealthy. And especially things that are not being tested, being shipped from overseas. You don't really know what's in them any more than you would know of any other product. Those things are also really resonating with people, and I think are definitely good places to market. There's good market research that shows that people are much more interested in shopping for things that are sustainable and natural. So I think, in a broad sense, there's a big opportunity for that.
Go ahead.
No, Courtney brought up a great point. Would you, in your experience doing natural dyes and in textiles, would you say, can you see a positive trend, say in the last 10, 15 years of more and more people seeking out those natural fibers with natural dyes compared to, 20 years ago?
There are definitely more people who are interested in natural dyes and natural fibers. I think that it's a niche, and I can even say I first really got interested in natural dyes about 10 years ago. There was not a lot of information. There were not a lot of people doing it. And now it's everywhere. It's great. It's, you can go buy dozens and dozens of books about it. And there are workshops, and there are people all over Instagram working with natural dyes, which is great. I think if we're talking about the general population, the several billion of us, I'm not sure things are trending in the right direction. It's like there's like this micro good news, and I get, that's where I hitch my hope. But especially when it comes to natural fibers, the percentage of synthetic fibers in our clothing is skyrocketing. And even in the last few years, synthetic fibers, petroleum-based fibers are cheap, and the fossil fuel industry wants us to use them. It's a use of fossil fuels. The amount of synthetic fibers being used right now is going up, and people are not educated to look at their clothing. I mean, I can't go shop in most stores anymore because you can't find something that's 100% cotton. Everything has polyester in it. Just about every t-shirt you're going to get. I think that is something that people are starting to get educated about. Research about the harms of microplastics that are shed by synthetic clothing are starting to become is starting to become more prominent. There's more research, but I still think that's like that. We're just starting to learn about that. It's like I think in some ways, like the toxicity of our clothing is potentially like lead in gasoline, right? Like suddenly we're going to realize this thing, we're swimming in it, and it's really bad for us.
Another thing that people don't realize is that there is an end of the line for the clothing, all the clothing that's ever been produced. It's in landfills, some of it here, but a lot of it goes overseas and ends up in on the shores of Africa and a few different places where there's just mountains, absolute mountains of clothes that can't decompose. They can only rot and leach into the water and pollute the region. And so there are people in the global supply chain that inherit all of the bad things of synthetic textiles and dyes. And one beautiful thing about natural dyes is that it can be a positive feedback loop and end in the soil and be returned to the system rather than being shipped off to hurt people and hurt the environment.
Yeah, I appreciate all that. That all makes good sense. I can see how there are some lessons perhaps from the local and organic food movement 20 or 30 years ago that could be applied to market development in this case. Let me get it down to brass tacks though, Max. If I grow flowers for dyes, is there somebody I can call as a farmer today and they can buy them? Is it worth it?
Yeah, so for me, one of the biggest supporters was an organization called Botanical Colors in Seattle. They're an online retailer of natural dyes, and Kathy Hattori is the head of them. She was one of the experts I consulted early on in like, what should I be growing? Like, what can I sell to hobby dyers? But also, are you interested in buying some of this stuff? And so she really helped me out in telling me that there was a market for it before I even started. So she purchased an amount of certain types of flowers like as I was starting, so I knew that was one place to go. And I know that she purchases from as many local producers as possible. There's a few other dye farmers in this area. That was the larger scale that I fed into, and it's not that I made a lot off of that. I was still selling in wholesale, and as a small scale producer, that was not the most profitable for me. But it was a way to tap into the supply chain, and there was room for me to grow through that. So from them, I got all sorts of support, just like financial, but also informational and support with workshops and support with their network of people. So they're one that I really relied on. But then there was just, especially in this area and a lot of other areas, cities and rural areas around the country, there's so many people working at the small hobby scale that are really interested in the value-added products, whether it's dye kits or dyed yarn or even bulk flour. And there was no shortage of interest from people at farmers markets that wanted to buy kits that were 20 grams of dried flowers in a $20 kit, those flowers and yarn to learn how to dye themselves. And so it was less for me about the direct wholesale sales, and it was more about value added and the teaching and hosting workshops, bringing people onto the farm. So a little bit of an agritourism market. And just with an eighth of an acre my first year and a quarter acre my second year, there was a lot of room and a lot of potential for market making and business. There were lots of people just in the local area that were interested in our product.
Fascinating. Brad, you've been involved in innovative agricultural products, markets that have sprung up sort of quote unquote overnight. There's the growing of it, there's the processing, and then there's the market making. And it seems like there's a chicken and egg thing that happens there. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think chicken and the egg is a great analogy. Farmers, in my experience, they're hungry for new opportunities, and I've seen that on the agriculture thing through many different products. Whether it's I've been involved in the hemp industry. I was involved in more system design for intensive aquaculture, looking at different varieties of hydroponic, aquaponic, and aquaculture systems. There's your essential oil production. You fill in the blank. People want to go back. A lot of people want to be able to use their hands in the soil and make a living for it. And so the new industries that prop up, I'm reminded of the saying, there's a pony in the barn someplace. My granddaddy was saying, basically meaning there's a kernel of truth in all of it. My experience says there is a need for these things. A lot of times where I've, kind of scratched my head, I guess is the best way to say it, is in some of these small niche areas, it seems increasingly difficult to be kind of the middleman in these nascent industries. There's so many moving pieces. Everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, is trying to build from the ground up these companies. And with that, there's leverage, there's hype, whether good or bad. I mean, it can be used in either way. And sometimes it's hard to navigate some of these systems. In my, specific experience with the natural dyes, all the things Max and Courtney have talked about are absolutely true in my experience as well. Like great product. We need this to set up a business that solely is taking in raw material in one door, converting it into a liquid or powdered dye and sending it out the other door. I found a bit of challenge in that personally. And that was, I also I would say that could be regional for me as well. I live in rural North Carolina. We're surrounded by cotton. Nobody that I know of doing natural dyes except Courtney. That's the thing. So it's kind of ironic in a way. In a lot of cases, we produce some really neat things. Initially, we used English ivy because I have about 10 acres overgrown with English ivy. It produced a greenish brown depending on how you processed it. We did an Osage orange. Courtney had hooked us up with. We took it down to shavings. We did extraction, a very vibrant, beautiful yellowish orange color that we loved. And we went to madder root and a few more. And so really exciting for us being able to produce it. The problem then was the scalability, kind of like Max had alluded to earlier. And so we spent all this time, labor, energy producing this dye. Now we've got a product we're ready to sell. And that's kind of, for us, it seemed to be kind of like Courtney had alluded to, a niche market. But the positive side being, even in the past, say 3 years or so since we had worked on that product, I've seen just increasing amounts of more and more people wanting this. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's difficult in my experience to really lock down having a natural dye processing place. It seemed like to me you had to do for the natural dyes at this nascent stage of the industry, at least for us. I felt like kind of what Max and Courtney have been involved with. I believe you kind of have to do a little bit of all of it, at least getting going to get that initial name out and those, initial customers and clients.
That's really helpful to understand, Brad. And as we've worked together, you've helped me to understand, if there's a demand for it and there's a dollar amount, attached to that demand and a spec attached to the product, farmers and processors are talented enough to make that. So Courtney, let me ask you about your marigold project that was really neat. with several partners around here, and what are the opportunities for collaborative projects, one-offs, or other things like that to start to stimulate demand in this kind of way, as Max and Brad are starting to think about these kind of planning things from the farming and processing perspective.
Sure. So the Marigold Beanie Project was something I did. I work for an apparel company in Burlington, North Carolina called TS Designs. And TS Designs, the thing they do that's special is have a completely domestic, sustainable, transparent supply chain. So they are, on the surface, a t-shirt printer. So when you want to have t-shirts for your brand made, you can go to them. But really, they're like an incubator for an R&D and like pioneer and sustainable, domestic supply chains. And so for the t-shirt side, that's been cotton. And we've started working with natural dyes. That was something I brought experience with because TS Designs has its own garment dyeing facility. And then we started looking at other products that were available. TS Designs is a member of an organization called Carolina Textile District, which is a network of apparel and textile companies that share values around sustainability and ethical production. It's an amazing network and an amazing resource that people all over the country are looking to as a model for connecting supply chain and helping people put together those pieces. And so Carolina Textile District has connections. Two of the other Carolina Textile District members are Material Return, which is a textile recycling company that is one of the only in North America that actually creates yarns from secondhand recycled textiles. And another company called Innova Knits, which does custom knitting on knitting machines. And then they also had connections to Carolina Textile District is located in Morganton in the foothills of North Carolina. And they also had a connection to a local brewery called Fonta Flora. And Fonta Flora has a little farm where they grow a lot of materials for their brews, make really fantastic stuff. And it turns out one of the things that they grow as a companion crop is marigolds. And marigolds are an excellent dye plant. And we hatched up a plan to create wool hats that were made entirely in North Carolina and dye them with marigolds from Fonta Flora. And we were able to make all of this happen in probably a little less than a year, and was a really beautiful thing. And it was made entirely in North Carolina by small companies just through getting together and collaborating and bringing each other's area of expertise together. We were fortunate enough to be given the Style Award for the best of Made in North Carolina, done through Our State magazine, which is a the sort of state North Carolina is awesome magazine. So we were really excited about that. So clearly, that's a sign that people really appreciated what we did, and it was really popular with our customers. We did a small batch, but have sold a lot of those, and I think that's just a sign that people really do value these things. And people were so amazed at the bright color we were able to get from marigold flowers. I think, you might try doing some dyeing with flowers at home, but if you don't really know the process and have the right materials, you're going to get like so-so results probably, and it might wash out. But if you use the techniques that have been used historically or have been developed in more contemporary times, it's going to work really well. So I think that was a really good sort of test case for natural fibers and natural dyes that people who are interested in those things really love.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming towards the end of our time here. Hope if anybody has anything else they'd like to say about possibilities around natural dyes and fibers coming up, but it just seems like a really neat application of sort of our theoretical thought around trying to make markets and livelihoods and opportunities for small farms, rural people, working people, and a great application of appropriate technology in both philosophy and sort of the material expression of that. Do we have any parting thoughts today? I know there's a lot more work on natural dyes all of us are going to do together in the upcoming months and years.
I've got one parting thought just about growing natural dyes as crops. I guess it's the only crop that I grew as a farmer, but it's so enjoyable to grow natural dye plants. It's creates a beautiful landscape, beautiful smells. It brings in all of the insects and there were so many days that I would just sit on the farm and watch the flowers blow in the wind and smell the smells. And I'm not currently farming on the farm, but I have my garden, and I hope to have another farm soon, because that was just one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think we can leave it at that, Max. Thank you for saying that. I think a deeper connection to our senses and our feelings is something we haven't really talked about here today, but something that really undergirds a lot of the work that we all do. So thank you all for being on today, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.